I'll just go through the usual preamble and then we'll crack on with the agenda. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. And to the agenda, item 1, appointment of substitutes. Julian.
Thank you, Chair. 2 substitutes tonight. That is Robin Norfolk. She's here for Jabba Riaz. Jo DeSera. She's here for. Sorry, right. Jill. No, actually, let's get this right. Robin, you're here for Adrian. You are. You're here for Adrian Gregson. Jill's here for Jabba Riaz.
Okay, welcome both. Item 2, declarations of interest. None whatsoever. We have no public participation. Item 4, the minutes of the last meeting. Should those who were present there have any wish to make comment, please do so at this moment. Otherwise, I will sign them off later in the meeting as correct. Okay. Happy with those? Okay, good. Item 5, Q2 performance report. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a separate report on the commercial strategy and income strategy update, so I'll just hand over to Mark, I think, in terms of going through the highlights and lowlights of income over the last quarter, if that's all right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll just run through the various graphs as we normally do at these meetings. So the first one is the riverside and the income that's generated from the various properties along there. Nothing more to say about that really. We then move on to the Guildhall and the income that's generated from the various room and corporate bookings for the hire of this building. As you can see, that's improved since the lows during the pandemic, and is in excess of the budget currently. That has been helped by the booking for the Titanic exhibition, and we'll see how the rest of the year pans out. But it's good to be back at a more consistent level of income. Trade waste, this is a positive success story, in spite of the fact that we've obviously lost the rugby club account. The income levels are achieving the budget, and if you look across that, for example, the 241,000 for Q1, look at the equivalent figure last year of 223, and equally the 205 for Q2 compares to 189 for last year. So there is good year-on-year growth there with the new accounts that are being opened. The next one is garden waste. So similar positive news here that the 2 quarters are both more than the equivalent periods last year and are actually exceeding the budget in these cases. I guess the interesting point is if you look at 22-23, there was an upward trend from Q1 to Q2, and for the current year that's flat. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the year pans out. But overall, that's a 4% growth compared to last year. Property, this is the gross income generated from the council's various properties, including the 2 office blocks at the hospital. I'd just draw your attention before anybody asks me the question. to the peak that's in Q1 of the 605,000. On reflection, when I looked at this earlier, that is actually incorrect. There's effectively 2 quarters of income put into Q1 rather than having smoothed it out, it should only be 1. So that really is only half of that income, which then makes it consistent with Q1 for last year. I'll make sure that's corrected in time for the next report. But the positive news is that year to date, that is 7% more than the same period last year, with the rent reviews that have been conducted producing increases from the previous rent. The next one is car parks. Again, another positive story. Obviously, car park income suffered during the pandemic and dropped quite significantly. Thankfully, that's now well behind us. This time last year, we were debating whether it was achievable to increase the car park tariffs, which eventually we did by about 8 or 9%. I guess there was some nervousness, inevitably, that how that would be received by users. And the positive story here is that it doesn't seem to have affected use. The income has increased and is in line with the budget, as you can see for the Q1 and Q2 figures. The next 2 are slightly more challenging. From bereavement income, we've spoken before about the challenges for this service, particularly since the new crematorium opened at Fladbury. And as you can see, we're still falling short of the budget, and at 344 for the last quarter, that's actually the lowest we've had for some time. It's actually 3.5% lower than the same period last year. Development management, so planning, building control, land charges. This is one where we've, for some time now, struggled to meet the budget. If you look back into 21-22, income was significantly higher then. And the main difference here is that we're just not receiving the large planning applications. There's still the underlying volume of small domestic ones, but we're not getting the income from larger ones coming through. The interesting development here that's literally happened in the last few weeks is that the government has approved the increase in statutory planning fees, which is due to take effect next month. So that should see an increase in the income. I don't think we'll be adjusting the budget to reflect that, because we'll need that increase in income just to try and get back to the budget we've already got. And then, last but not least, neighbourhood income. So this is the income we receive mainly from the county council for transportation of the street sweepings, and then any ad hoc income, whether it's following flooding or anything else. The graph does tend to go up and down here a bit, partly because I guess the raising of invoices isn't the guys at the depot's main priority, so sometimes they fall a little behind and catch up, as we can see in the spike at the end of last year. But at the moment we are slightly behind, although as the note says, that didn't include September's invoices, though those were being prepared at the time the figures were submitted. And oh, there is one more, sorry, I forgot museums. Again, positive, and some good information added at the bottom by Philippa. You can see that consistently we're beating the budget here. Certainly last year was helped by the exhibitions, but that has continued into this year, and is, I think, a testament to the team and the initiatives that they've introduced. The escape room at the commandery, for example. Okay, that's it. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Mark, thank you. Yeah, any questions or comment there? Jill de Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. It may not be a question for you really, but I was wondering why garden waste doesn't get collected all year, because I know it stops, doesn't it, in December until some time in the spring. But you know, we'd be happy to continue paying and having the bin emptied. So I just wondered if that could be thought about. That's all.
Through you, Chair, the understanding, we discussed this in the past, is that simply there isn't the volume of material there to collect during those months. So it costs more to collect it than it does we get in terms of income. But I'll feed that back to Lloyd and see if it's something we can continue to look at. We'll come back onto the subject of what we do about current services in a bit, actually. It's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for producing the report. First of all, I'm really pleased to see it at the beginning of the meeting when we have an opportunity to have a sort of high-level view and probe if necessary. I think it's really useful. I'm really pleased to see the car parks income, and considering that it proved quite controversial, and I know that there were differences among political groups on whether they should be increased or not. With the Christmas season upon us, this is looking very, very positive. What I would like to understand a little bit better is this bereavement income. I do understand the Bluntbury and the sort of some income being grabbed there. What's behind it? What's the thinking? How would you characterize it, Mark? People don't want to die. I don't want to state the obvious.
I think the only comment I can add is that the volumes of cremations that the service are dealing with is reduced. Part of that is because there's a reduction in what we call direct cremations. So this is where there isn't a service and it's purely a cremation only service, and those tend to come from a wider geographical area, and the risk of being a touch insensitive perhaps, it is very price driven, and if there's other crematoria who are prepared to offer that at a lower price, then the people who deal with those will go elsewhere, and compared to 2 or 3 years ago we are seeing less of those, but that's not the only driver behind the reduction in income.
Particular area of conversation, as it were, will be something that you take up with your own colleagues on the Environment Committee, because it's an ongoing narrative, and I'm sure it will be on agendas, you know, in the future. I mean, happy to take any further comment here, but obviously we can delve back into this. Sarah.
Just a quick question. Thank you for producing this. It's really encouraging to see the income from museums has risen in the way that it has. I'm really pleased to see that. Is part of that to do with Sunday as well? Is that something that has already come in? I understand. No, it's not come in yet. So it will get better even still. Excellent. That's really good news. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Moving to agenda item 6, Freedom Leisure. Those of you who may have been part of Communities Committee a week or so ago will have encountered this particular report before, but Alan has very kindly joined us this evening to give us a run through. Do you want to add anything before we go there, Shane?
Thank you, Chair. Just to, for those who are not, are wondering why we're looking at this again, having looked at it at the Communities Committee last week, it's simply because constitutionally, it's the responsibility of this committee to recommend changes in fees and charges through to council. So in fact, through to Policy and Resources and then on to council in February. And all of that will take place in January. So we'll have a detailed review of all our fees and charges proposals at our January meeting. But Freedom Leisure changed theirs on the 1st of January in order to capture the market of all those people trying to wear off their Christmas dinners. So it comes here earlier in the cycle for agreement before being recommended on to Policy and Resources and Council. So I know it's a bit clumsy and it just seems we're going over the same ground a lot, but that's how it's set up constitutionally, so that's the only reason that we do it. And Alan's here if we want to ask any detailed questions about that. If we can't answer them today, then there'll be another opportunity to provide answers through to the council meeting when it's approved for agreement onwards as part of the budget work.
It's quite a question and also a word of thanks. I was in the communities committee last week, and I was asking about how we compare with other providers in the city, and very helpfully Alan was able to share a sample. It looks really, really good in the sense that Freedom Leisure are competitive and offer really good value for the money. So sorry to be sort of adding additional pressure on your busy schedule, but I'm reassured, and I really welcome this. I think that's it. That's really a quick comment and a word of thanks.
Thank you. I was in so many committees last week, I can't remember which one it was, but this came and there was a question about a discrepancy on the annual direct debit reduction discount for a certain group of, certain class of membership. Does this report reflect an adjustment for that?
Thank you, Chair. I think correct me, but there were two issues, which was the clarification over the the annual membership in terms of being 11 months of the 12-month fee. Right, okay, so if it wasn't that one, I don't remember another clarification.
Sorry, through you, Chair. So, Alan, if you turn to, for instance, package type like the junior swim school, for example, which is on page 31. So you've got a DD standard, but no DD concession. So it was a question why some have got a concession and some haven't. That was it. That was the question, wasn't it?
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, that relates to the Advance 25 and the Advance 50 scheme. So it's the concessionary scheme. So you'll see at the beginning of the Freedom Leisure document that there is a breakdown on the front page there of the eligibility criteria. And the reason that on the Advance 50 rates, there aren't necessarily prices in certain columns is because they don't reflect a 12-month period, because the eligibility during that period can expire. So what Freedom Leisure do in terms of their pricing strategy is they offer discounts on pay-as-you-go activities, but they don't offer the same discounts on the annual memberships, on the regular kind of DD memberships, because otherwise what was happening historically was somebody's circumstances could be that they were eligible for one of the benefits. They would take out an annual membership. For instance, 2 months later, they could find employment, and then for 10 months, they were benefiting from a discount that they weren't entitled to because they were earning a salary. So that's the reasoning behind that.
Okay, any further questions, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a general comment. We were 2019, 2021. Yeah. There was this was a problematical relationship, and Freedom were asking for a substantial amount of contributions from the council. So we established a sort of monthly open book accounting approach where we could see what their income streams were and what their expenditure was. And as a result of that, we managed to bring ourselves back to a position where they were able to pay the management fee for all of last year. We got the whole amount last year, and we're now anticipating the same, despite all the big increases in energy costs, etc., etc. So, you know, this has come back to a very solid contract, which brings in a substantial amount of income for the council, and it's due for renewal in 26, I think, isn't it? 2025. So we're going to be into negotiations with that soon, and then we'll be talking here about how the impact of that process affects the income on this contract. So we'll be having a much more detailed discussion in the next 12, 24 months around how this contract works, which will be a very interesting exercise, I think.
Thanks very much. Any further questions or comment? Right, okay. The recommendation 1.2 essentially is that this report will go to the council meeting on the 30th, final approval. Happy to note that, yes? Brilliant, thank you very much. Alan, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Alan.
So we move to agenda item 7, commercial strategy update. Shane?
Thank you, Chair. I've committed to updating our commercial strategy. In truth, it needs updating. It was a 3-year strategy, and I've attached the previous one as an appendix for reference. But in starting to think about that, and it will be done during this financial year, I'm committed to that. I was starting to think, well, what direction do we go in? How has this changed since it was first drafted? It was drafted initially to try and do 3 things, which were something which was agreed by Council back in 2016. One was to reset all of our income budgets, make them much more progressive in the way that we were trying to target income and think about the way that we do things from a planned point of view rather than a reactive one. The second was around our discretionary services and trying to drive those, have a proper approach to dealing with them and making sure we understood what we were doing and what we were trying to do and how that worked in the market. And then there was this idea, what was referred to as 2 or 3 big ticket items. Just what could we do in terms of a step change in income? And it's evident going back through the strategy that we have achieved all of those. So that strategy has been fulfilled today. And just to reflect on that, paragraph 3.3 there shows how income has changed between 18-19 and 23-24 in terms of budgeted terms. So as per our actual in 22-23 is £600,000 more than it was in 18-19. But as Mark suggested, we're on target to reach the budget for this year, then that's £1.3 million more than it was back in 18-19. So the committee, under the remit of the committee, it has been very successful in achieving that. And a lot of that has been driven by our much more progressive approach to budgeting. So we try and look over 3 years on average and set that as a target and set targets for people to increase income rather than simply reacting to the last year. And also, the items of the properties that we've acquired when we were in a position to be able to acquire property, which has added £500,000 or so to our income streams. But since then, the government, the Treasury and SIPFA and others have decided that they don't want councils doing risky things like buying property and garages and shopping centres and stuff like that. So we're no longer able to do that and need to rethink that what we do. And in trying to think about that, there are 3 areas, it seems to me, that we can focus on. One is to continue to look for assets which can generate income, but to make sure that's done within the context of a development or progress. So Future High Streets Fund is a really good example of using that money to invest in assets which will, in the fullness of time, generate income for the council. So we can do more of that, and we can explore that in much more detail than we have done for the time being. Secondly, to think about all the other assets where we've got tenants. I wrote something called a capital and asset management framework a few years ago, which was about reviewing systematically our assets and saying, well, are we generating as much income as we can do from them? So we got them for the right reason, and if not, sell them and let's have the capital investment and do something with that. So we've had a couple of goes at that and looking at what assets we've got in terms of bits of land that we can use and set for development, and we've had two iterations of our capital strategy since then. So we kind of bring that back again and start to think again about how we can deal with that better. And then the third is just to go back at looking at discretionary services. And this principle, which we've talked about during the budget, but is not written down anywhere, that is a political principle. So really it's not one for me to put forward, but for the council to accept, is that where you've got a discretionary service, in principle, that should be paid for by the people who use it, rather than being paid for by all council taxpayers. But that's a much bigger decision. And I think it's what the role this committee can play in that is to, by reviewing all of those discretionary services systematically, scrutinising them and saying, well, is that the right? Have we got that right? Is this one where we think it should be paid for by the individuals who use it, or it should be something which is for the benefit of the council as a whole, or the city as a whole? So what's sort of emerging from this are 3 strands of work, therefore. The continuation of looking at big assets when they become available, to explore them. And the last one was the one we discussed in a great deal of detail earlier in the year, and decided then not to progress, but we could do that, particularly around housing, affordable housing, when those come up. Look at all the bits of property that we've got. So do we need it? Should we sell it? Do we keep it? What are we doing with it? And then thirdly, systematically going through service by service and saying, well, is this a setup? Actually, I think, Tom, we talked about bereavement services. Was it back in the July meeting? I think earlier in the summer, Doug came along and talked about all the things he was trying to do in bereavement services to address that declining income by looking at different things, different ways that we can do it. So I think within that, there are sufficient strands of work for the committee in terms of scrutinising and setting policy and agreement, which we can then take forward and implement. And then, of course, we can come back and see how well we're doing. So that's as far as I've got in terms of thinking about that. The fuller version of this should come back to us at the January meeting. Once I've digested my Christmas dinner, I'll sit down with my quill and parchment and start knocking it together. But I hope that's okay. Whether there are any other things, I know we talked about this a little bit last time, are there other areas that you want to explore or think we should be looking at in more detail, then feed them back, and or we can bring them to that next meeting and then implement them or introduce them into the strategy then, if that's okay.
Brilliant, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
I mean, from my perspective, the preferred option 1, 2 and 3, as it were, should inform kind of everything we do as a council going forward. I mean, much of this is beyond one conversation. It should simply be part of the ongoing narrative, so that, you know, how we move to a form of business where we're becoming more commercially sensitive and minded, and still but not losing sight of our obligations towards the plan. That's the trick we have to, as it were, you know, pull together. Any comment as we stand? Sarah?
Just very quickly, a question based on what you just said at the end there about feeding back ideas. When we have ideas, how do you want us to feed them back? I mean, is this the place to do it? Do you want emails? I just don't understand when I'm meant to speak up and discuss my ideas, because I do have a few, and whether they're viable, I don't know.
Through you, Chair. So this is the formal opportunity to do it, but many of your colleagues will contact me through any number of media, buttonhole me in passageways or send me an email or by other means, let me know that there's something to consider, and we'll take them on board and explore them. Yeah, so whenever, Sarah, if you just give me a ring or let me know. The other thing, of course, is we do our annual survey every year, so that's an opportunity always for people to comment and make suggestions as to things they think we should take forward. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, because you said this is the formal place to do it, one idea that cropped up when you were talking about assets and whether we're using them and getting the best value from them. Recently, hedge trimmers have been out in Warndon villages cutting back the hedges, of which there are hundreds. And it seems to have been a policy in recent years to only cut them from the side and not cut them down. So hedges that were planted as hedges are now becoming trees. Residents are constantly complaining about their light being blocked off. They're worried about trees falling, branches falling. I'm just wondering if there is an income stream there whereby we could offer a service that we can provide and charge for it. If people want the hedges bringing down, lowered, the ones that are adjacent to their property, perhaps they could contribute to the cost of cutting them.
So back to the bereavement services, sitting in this committee more than a year ago, I suggested to Doug, had he considered the venue as somewhere for entertainment? I mean, it sounds a bit odd, but actually you can do very atmospheric poetry readings or little drama presentations. I've seen it done in London at one of the big cemeteries. Really, really nice events can be staged there. So I just mentioned that, and I sent him an email separately, but I don't know if that's something that he could, probably for the better weather, but as a plan.
Emerges is when we begin to think creatively about this. There's quite a bit that we could do. There was a sort of a reticence about this committee's legitimacy stroke longevity, but actually when you place it within the structure, you know, it actually could achieve quite a bit if we use that opportunity. I know the next committee meeting is not until January, so we're going to have to use other means to sort of filter the ideas into the system. But I think we can definitely do that. Anyone else want to pick it up now? Tom.
Thank you, and it's really good that we are looking at this now ahead of Christmas festivities. And there's a couple of things. I think this is not, in my mind at least, this shouldn't be developed in isolation, in the sense that, for instance, if we are looking at car parks, which is the biggest item when it comes to the income, I would be interested to see what we are doing in terms of monitoring the behavior change in travel patterns. So that's probably for, well, where should it sit actually? That's a good question. Is this environmental committee and active travel, or who should look at this? But I think what I'm trying to say here, leaving aside the differences and whether some sort of colleagues might want to sort of make a political capital out of the issue, this is a serious and responsible way of looking at it as an income generation item for us as a council, a significant one. So I would like to see an exercise, an attempt at trying to project, and I think I've mentioned this before in this committee, what we can afford in terms of, well, affordability, but also the changing travel behaviors in people using our car parks. The second question which I have is, and this goes back to what Jill was saying about services. Sorry, was it Jill or Sarah? I'm getting confused now, but basically trying to offer certain services at cost. Again, Shane is hopefully going to recall a conversation we had some time ago about developing a kind of circular economy approach and talking to our partners and basically trying to provide services at a cost. So, for instance, grounds maintenance, right? Doing a deal with, I don't know, I'm plucking this out of the air. This is me sort of freestyling when it comes to the thinking. University, colleges, I don't know, one of the biggest housing associations headquartered here. Three obvious people, hospitals perhaps as well. Is it something that we could explore, considering that there are good examples across the country, Preston notwithstanding, where I think they call it anchor organizations, but they come together and effectively decide to share services. It saves money to people, excuse me, to some institutions, whereas provides income to others which have the capacity to provide, as an example, grounds maintenance, grass cutting and such. So those are my two questions. Now it's formal, there's no escaping from it. But I'm really pleased we are looking at this now, and I really welcome this. Thank you.
Okay. Any further? Jill?
I sort of hate to mention it, but probably will. A while ago, we looked into garden trade waste and whether or not that was a viable thing to offer as a paid service. And the answer eventually came back, no. I'm still not entirely convinced that you couldn't just sell a few permits. You know, I understand on a wholesale scale, and I know Mark was looking at this as well, on a wholesale level, it probably doesn't work because of having to deal with county and paying them. But I think the City Council used to offer half a dozen or a dozen permits a year for businesses to turn up with garden waste. And, you know, there's a green implication to not doing this because people are now driving much further to get rid of their garden waste than they would otherwise have to. And so, yeah, forgive me, I know you've given me an answer on this, but I'm just wondering whether a slight tweak to the question might bring a different one.
Experience, you ask me many questions, Jill, and you don't always get the answer you're looking for. So, Shane, is there anything you want to pick up with anything we've said so far?
Yes, Chair, if
okay.
you wish. And I've explored this several times in the past, and the issue is always about getting to a starting point, because it's about having that capacity to deliver those services to other partners. And yes, if you're doing it in a partnership way, then you can share things, can't you? So you do a bit of this and we'll do a bit of that. But unless you've got surplus capacity in the first place, you've got to build it up. So that's at risk. And then there's always the question, well, why did the local authority put all that money into that and it never then took off? Whose idea was that then? So it's that kind of dilemma which you've always got to work your way through. So there has to be sufficient evidence of demand to make it viable, once you've risk assessed it. And that was, I think, the question in terms of the garden trade waste was, is there sufficient demand for it, such as to put the mechanics in place to make it work? But yes, looking at permits and other ways of doing it, if there's marginal demand, then certainly we'd want to explore it. And that's what I mean about, well, let's look at these discretionary services and say, well, what can we fill in the gaps? Can we do things differently? Can we explore that? And just as a final comment from me, really, we have to remember that as things stand, of the £26 million or so a year that we spend, half of that comes from council tax, business rates and government grant, insofar as they're kind enough to give us any. The rest comes from income that we generate. So it is absolutely critical that there is sufficient attention paid to that whole branch of income management within the council. It's changed, obviously, from where it was in terms of those big ticket items. We can't do that anymore, but nonetheless, we have to continue to look at this and continuously improve it, to borrow that rather hackneyed phrase now, if we're going to continue as a council.
Okay, thank you. I've got Sarah and then Tom.
Just wondering, on the subject of garden waste, do we compost it and sell it back?
I'm afraid I don't, but that then falls within the county council's remit, because everything we collect, we then hand over to them for them to deal with.
Thank you very much for indulging me one more time. Just very, very quickly, something that occurred to me when I was listening to Shane. One of the things that we did do in terms of joining dots, and I think it's a really good example. We've got somebody who's looking after the housing enabling strategy and trying to establish partnerships and develop income streams through tenanted mainly, because that's looking at affordable housing. I think it's an excellent example of how well we can join the dots between different strategies. So I'd like to offer sort of, thanks and it's a great idea. I think that's one of the things to pursue further. However, a slightly critical note, if I may. You did mention the Future High Street Fund. I think what we have to be open to, and the Housing Enabling Strategy is demonstrating this in terms of preferred approaches, is joint venture approach. The Scala project is a mess. I think we could have done so much better in being sort of much more open-minded to merge partnerships at the beginning. Again, I want to put this on record, and whereas I suppose it's a balance of, whereas we do certain things really well, we should be learning lessons from other missed opportunities.
Any further comment? I mean, one question I pose, and not necessarily looking for an answer right at the moment, you mentioned in the report about the MAG, essentially, and what might be done. I know Philippa was at PED last week, and we discussed it at some length about, opening hours, etc. But the extent to which it might be viable to develop the building in a much more, to enhance its sort of its museum and arts offer, essentially, and whether that would work in terms of, where people are located and all the rest of it. I don't necessarily think there's probably an answer for this meeting, but it is just off the top of your head, is that a viable conversation going forward, do you think?
Yes, Chair, it is a conversation that is ongoing. It's a live conversation at the moment. And one of the planks of that will be, as I think Sarah just mentioned, is about Sunday opening. So one of the things that the features of Sunday opening of the museum and art galleries is that the downstairs is empty. So then, can we use that space? Yeah. And if so, can we then carry on using that space at other times and try and find you know, a way of, because it's always been, well, we use it downstairs as an office and the upstairs as a museum and art gallery, and it's either one or the other. Well, I think we're getting to a point where we can say, well, perhaps we can use some of it and share that functions, you know, we could perhaps cut up some of the building and make some of it office and some of it part of the museum. So we're starting to explore ways we can do that much more flexibly. And I think that's being driven by the fact that people have now recognised the museum and galleries offer is a good one that people are prepared to pay for. And that seems to be where we're at. So, yeah, I think it's a live conversation, and I think it's going to go, it's a positive one we're having at the moment, definitely.
Good. Excellent. So basically, we can essentially not close the conversation, pause it, because I think what we've stimulated this evening has been a conversation about how this can go forward, how we develop ourselves as a commercial entity, while not losing sight of the fact that, you know, we have obligations that we've happily entered into in terms of the city plan. And I would hope that we can develop that through our conversations within our respective groups and take it to the committees to which it's appropriate. But you know, as I said, just to repeat what Shane and Mark have said, you know, let's get those conversations going backwards and forwards via email or whatever media you want to choose, basically, because I think, you know, the more we develop that mindset, I think the better will be. So on that note, I will simply ask that you note the progress against the commercial strategy 21-24. Happy to do that, yes. And the proposals for the revised strategy, which are obviously contained within preferred option 5, and we've begun to explore those, and we'll no doubt do more of that as time goes on. So are we happy to take both of those? Yes? Excellent, thank you.
Thank you very much.
On that note, I will draw this meeting to a conclusion. Sorry, Robin, yes.
Could I just, thank you for that. Can I just return to agenda item 6? Sorry. The decision we made was to note that this report will go to the council meeting on the 30th of November. Yeah. Next council was on the 28th. Which is correct. I don't want to be that person, but I just...
That's referring to the secret council we haven't told you about.